The rich not just get richer, but they're going to actually become genetically and machine oriented better than us.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Claire.
Hello, my Lion Cubs, and welcome back to another edition of Lions of Liberty. And boy, if I do say so myself, and I do, I've got a really interesting interview for you today in the 287th episode of this program, and that means you can find today's show notes featuring links to all sorts of things that we discuss in the show over at lionsofliberty.com/287. And before I dive into things with my guest today, I want to take a second to remind you that if you want to see this show grow and expand and blow the F up here in 2017, you can help us do so by becoming a member of the Lions of Liberty Pride. That'll give you access to all sorts of exclusive audio content like the Conspiracy Corner, which we just released this past weekend for subscribers only. Boy, did we have fun doing that one. You can learn everything you need to know by heading over to lionsofliberty.com/support. Today's guest is a journalist, having worked as an on-camera reporter for the National Geographic Channel. Many consider him responsible for the popularization of the Transhumanist movement, and we'll get more into just what that is during the interview. He is the founder of the Transhumanist Party, under which he ran for president in 2016, and he has recently announced his candidacy for the California Governorship in 2018, and he is running for that office as a Libertarian. I am very pleased to welcome Mr. Zoltan Istvan. Zoltan, are you ready to roar?
Indeed I am.
Alrighty, Zoltan, and we'll talk more about your run for California governorship. Like I said, you're running as a Libertarian, so that's going to be of interest to a large portion of the audience of this program. But, you know, the big issue you're associated with is transhumanism, and I really want to dig into that. But before we get too far there, I just want to make sure everyone is on the same page, because not everybody out there may be familiar with that term. So why don't you just start by telling us exactly what is the concept behind transhumanism?
Sure. Well, transhumanism is a social movement of a few million people around the world, and maybe a lot more now. And these people want to use science and technology to radically modify the human being and also to modify the human experience. So it can be anything from kind of like exoskeleton suits that would get a disabled person out of a wheelchair. It could be something like chip implants so you can replace keys. It could also be something just like driverless cars. But whatever it is, it's radical technology that is redefining what it's like to be a human being.
So when you describe it that way, in many ways, it sounds like we've been having a transhuman movement since the dawn of mankind in a certain way. It's just that with technology kind of taking place and changing so rapidly, we're just experiencing it kind of in a much faster way right now. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. Actually, some of the historians of the movement would say that, transhumanism began when we picked up a rock and decided to make it into an axe. But, a lot of other transhumanists would say, well, is flying in a jet airplane 30,000 feet, above the earth, is that transhumanism? But most people really like to think that, it's something like when you put on virtual reality gear. That's really transhuman because you're kind of transcending your senses and things like that to get into a sort of a different type of reality. So it's something that usually most people say it's really got to be radical technology.
It seems to me like the big focus when it comes to transhumanism is really the merging of man with technology, whether it's uploading our consciousness, something extreme like that, or just something as simple as having a robotic arm and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I would say, that is perhaps, there's kind of two avenues out there. A lot of the older school transhumanists, for them, the most important thing is to try to overcome death with science and technology. And they can do that in many different types of ways. But a lot of the younger generation, they're not worried about dying because they're going to live another 80 years or whatever. So they're really interested in the kind of the technology aspects, like the robotic arms that they can now throw a football a mile in length and stuff like that. So yeah, there's really two different types of kind of fields out there, depending on, I guess, almost your demographic and your age group.
Right. I want to take the clock back just a minute. And how did you first become so interested in this concept of transhumanism to the point that, I mean, as far as I can tell, you may be literally the world's leading enthusiast on the subject. I mean, you're pumping out articles every week. You're running presidential campaigns to draw attention to the issue. How did you become so passionate about this subject?
So, I'd always been interested in science and in technology. And I was kind of one of those kids that, worked on science kits all the time in my childhood. And then I was reading a lot of science fiction as I went to college and things like that. But As I began working for the National Geographic Channel, I had a really close call with a landmine in Vietnam while doing a film assignment. And, after that incident, I just sort of thought, wow, I almost died. I wonder if we can do anything really about death. Now, I'd known, the movement. Transhumanism has existed 20, 30, 40 years. So there have been people trying to overcome death for a long time through science and technology. But all of a sudden, when I had a very close call, I realized, wow, maybe I should dedicate a lot of my energy to the movement, maybe my resources, maybe my journalism skills. And ultimately, that's what happened. After the landmine incident in Vietnam, I came back and wrote a novel called The Transhumanist Wager, which did really well and sort of put me kind of as a public figure for the movement. And that's sort of how I got to where I am now.
So it took a near-death experience yourself to actually become obsessed with the idea of that we maybe don't need to die ever. I mean, isn't that the ultimate goal of transhumanism, is to be able to extend human life, and if you perfect the process, extend it indefinitely?
Yeah. No, I would say, broadly speaking, that is the number one goal, is to kind of perfect life. And, you can, there's a lot of people, can argue what perfection actually is. And in most cases, at least in my case, I would say, well, everybody leaves me perfectly alone so that I can kind of evolve through the universe doing whatever I am, using whatever technologies I want. And that's sort of the libertarian aspect of it. But other people, have ideas of sort of merging all of humanity into one and becoming like this great cosmic universe. But whatever it is, there's a lot of different factions of transhumanism, but it always involves radical science and technology and improvement. Improvement is sort of the operating kind of procedure of transhumanism. We just want to improve ourselves.
Now, you're not just an enthusiast in the sense that you like to talk about this subject. You, from what I understand, you actually have a chip in your hand, or had a chip in your hand at one point. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I still have a chip in my hand. They're tiny. They're the size of a grain of rice. You can inject them yourself. I got to put in on my presidential campaign bus tour as part of a biohacker kind of event that was put on. And, now when I go surfing or when I go jogging, I don't have to take keys with me because I can open things with this chip in my hand, as long as the key code is kind of embedded into this to this locking system. You can also start cars, and mine actually, from my 2006 presidential election, if you come close enough to me, my chip will send you off a text message that says win in 2016.
Really? So if I'm walking by Zoltan Istvan and just zoning out, looking at Facebook or something, I might get a text from you, from your hand, from the chip in your hand, telling me to check out your presidential campaign.
Yes, if you have the right software, that 100% will happen.
That's so interesting to me. And, a lot of this stuff, it sounds so sci-fi, but it seems like a lot of this stuff is closer than a lot of people realize, because I didn't even realize what you're telling me could be done yet. It seems like something maybe humans will do in 20 years, but this is so close that it's here, it's on top of us, and you're actually experiencing it. It's kind of mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. A lot of people worry about the chip and privacy things and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't realize that, when we say chip, it's not a chip in the sense that it's like you can program it or it's a microchip with a bunch of information. It's really a responder of some sort where you program information into it. And then if you have something out in the environment, it responds directly to you. So it's just really an RFID tag, except a super souped up one. But one of the things that's going to be coming through the pipeline next, in fact, there should be here in the next month or two, is really people putting their credit cards into their chips. So when you go to Starbucks, you no longer need your wallet with you. You just swipe your hand and all of a sudden payment has gone through. And, that basically, this little implant in my hand can already reduce my wallet size by about 50%. And for a lot of people, that's convenient.
Absolutely. And along with that convenience, of course, comes a lot of the concerns that a lot of people have about this technology. I mean, you might have the extreme where some people just associate a chip in your hand with, the mark of the beast or something like that because of their religious beliefs. And then you have people that just might have maybe more, valid concerns about the police state and the possibility of, well, if you got this chip in your hand and it controls all these devices, well, can that be hacked? Can that be tracked by the government? How much information is going to sort of, become a possible burden for you if you have that on you at all times? What are these the kind of concerns that you hear from people, when you're talking about this out there and giving speeches about transhumanism?
Oh, yeah. So when we took our bus tour, and I got my chip in California, and then we drove all the way across to the East Coast of Washington, D.C., and we spent a huge amount of time, months, literally in the middle in the Bible Belt. I mean, everybody kind of liked me that seemed that. And then they find out I had a chip implant. They said, oh, this is the mark of the beast. This is the work of the devil. And frankly, a lot of people said the exact same thing when the Social Security number came out, because we have been kind of trained culturally to believe that any kind of marking on you is something that is religiously, evil or part of this apocalypse, whatever. But the reality is, the chip is nowhere near as sophisticated as the cell phone. And it's the cell phone that's really tracking us these days. I mean, we all live by it. We talk on it. We search internet on it. It's 3 feet from our head when we're sleeping. And we have so many apps. There's no way to really stop them from even if it's just tracking our consumerism. But the reality is, there's a huge amount of privacy that we've sort of given up to be a part of the technological age. Now, I'm not necessarily happy about that, but I think the real key is to have different types of software programmers that can create ways to keep the government out of your life. But to say no to the technology up front, like the chip implant, just because we're worried about hacking, we're worried about privacy, that's not the proper way to go. I think the proper way is to embrace the technology and then look for ways to protect that technology so that no one can use it against us in a negative way.
And the timing of this interview is pretty perfect on this subject, because it was just last week that WikiLeaks released the Vault 7 with all of the information about how the CIA is able to use our current technology to track us and spy on people, whether it's smart cars or smart TVs or what have you. So when people are concerned about the, quote, possibility of technology, transhuman technology being used, well, this stuff is already being used in the regular technology that we voluntarily choose to have. So, like you said, the concerns are legitimate, but it doesn't mean we should reject all the technology. We're already embracing the technology. It's just a matter of having to have certain controls or what have you. I'm not really sure what all the answers are to protect the privacy of individuals using this technology, but just because there are concerns doesn't mean it should be rejected wholesale.
Well, yeah. And, one of the things I've advocated for in the past is I've said, well, like, if I'm going to be tracked, or if other people are going to, take away my privacy, well, we should take away the privacy of officials, of the government itself. We should be using the same technology to watch them very closely so that they can't do things against us. This is a two-way street. It's not just that we're losing some of our privacy. We can also make it so that they lose it. So we have a lot more transparency in the government in itself. And I think that's what a lot of people forget, is that, in this day and age, when, for example, a police pulls someone over and they're being videotaped, everything they do, we can make sure that we can, we have some type of way of fighting back by saying, well, look, the police did this wrong or did that wrong. That's a way to protect them. And that's, of course, the other side of the street for technology. It can also be used to protect ourselves.
Can you think of any, particularly sort of mind-blowing concepts in transhumanism that the average person might hear and say, oh my God, that's impossible. That technology, maybe that's 1,000 years away, but in reality, it's going to be either 5 years away or is maybe even here now. Is there anything that stands out to you?
Well, I think the one thing that I deal a lot, well, there's a couple different ones. There's so many amazing stuff, but let's focus on one that almost a little bit with this privacy issue in hand is the robotic eye. There are about 6 universities or companies around the world spending tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars cumulatively on the robotic eye, because we have 2 eyes as human beings, and we're going to be able to create eyes very soon. We already have them. I mean, blindness, essentially, if you have access to the technology, doesn't fully exist anymore, because we have now ways to put in some kind of filming device that can tie right into your optic nerve, and then you can retrain your brain to see light. So blindness in certain ways no longer exists, and probably in 2 years will not exist whatsoever. But this begins a whole new way of looking at things, because if you can replace one eye with a robotic eye, and you can now stream media directly into it, or we could have, different types of podcasts filtering through that eye. And also you have to understand the eyes that they have, the robotic eyes, can already see better than the human eye. Naturally, they can see further, and naturally, they can see much closer. You can see the germs on your partner, on your children. I mean, so I think the robot
we don't really want to see.
No, of course, you'll be able to see poisonous gases. You'll be able to see if somebody, release gas in a restaurant. That's what smells. I mean,
when you describe this eye, I envision the movie Predator, where the Predator has the different little eye modes, and he can turn on one mode, and he just sees heat, so you can't hide from him because he sees all the life, and you can switch to another mode and see other things. Is that the kind of thing we might be able to do eventually?
Well, not eventually. That's the kind of thing that if you have this already built into your eye, you can do it today. Because, the technologies you're talking about already exist. It's really just a matter of, can we commercially put that into the eye socket and have it tie into the optic nerve and use it. And, frankly, of course we can. It's really just a matter of how much money do you have to spend and is it viable from a commercial point of view? And this is one of the reasons I bring, the robotic eye up, is that since most humans have two eyes, and since the new robotic eyes, they can make them look so realistic, like from any kind of distance, you can't tell if your neighbor has a robotic eye because they look so good, that would you get one if you knew it was going to be a real upgrade on your life, on your you no longer need your little tablet to look through. You just stream stuff directly into your eyeball, which goes to your brain. There's a lot of reasons why this kind of upgrade will probably work on a lot of people in society. And I'm saying within 10 to 15 years, this could be something that we all start doing. And there's a lot of reasons to do it. For example, you walk into a room and your child is there. And let's say you're in the jungle, you live in Brazil or something, your eyeball will be able to track poisonous spiders or snakes a lot better than it does. Your eyeball would always be activated. It would smell. It would be a built-in fire alarm. I mean, these are the kinds of things people are working on because naturally they're going to add so much safety to our human lives. And that's why I think the robotic eye is probably something on the 10 to 15-year timeline that you're going to see us all getting, just because it's going to be so easy. I mean, you're going to see 100 miles.
Is there a concern, I guess, about, people talk about income inequality. It's a very big political issue, as you know. But at some point, we might actually see sort of like, if we just want to stay on the eye thing for a second, you can start with, say, eye inequality, where all the richest people in our society have these amazing, perfect eyes, and they buy them for all their children. And now they have this huge advantage over, maybe the other 95% that can't afford them yet. And then you might see the same thing with any sort of technology. I mean, if you talk about gene editing a lot, you can maybe even eventually edit our genes so we're just smarter if we have that technology. Do you see any danger in all of this technology sort of falling into maybe what people would call the 1%? I would call more like the 0.00001%. Is there a danger of them sort of maybe hoarding this technology and almost creating like a separate species where one set of humans has greater technology, greater IQs, and can sort of dominate over the rest of them? And that is, of course, that's a very sci-fi scenario, but you did get into this from science fiction. So no, you probably heard it before.
No. On my campaign trail, there are two questions I always got asked, and I'm still getting asked them all the time. The first is, well, if everyone lives, indefinitely, won't we have overpopulation? We can address that one later. But the second one is about inequality, because naturally everybody's worried that the rich are going to get this stuff first, and they literally leave us behind. And frankly, I think it's a realistic worry. And, it's one of the reasons why even though I'm running for governor as a libertarian, I've told people I still maintain that I'm sort of a left-leaning libertarian, because it's not because I want to be that way. It's because I worry that incrementally the rich not just get richer, but they're going to actually become genetically and machine-oriented better than us. And that those advantages are going to be coupled on top of their wealth. If you think it's a free, market right now, at some point it won't be free, because you'll be dealing with someone whose IQ is always 200, as opposed to ours, the average being 115 or 107 or whatever it is. And, is that correct? And you have to ask yourself, well, at some point, what if they become a super species and we become almost like gorillas to that 1%? Does the government step in? Do libertarians step in? And these are very tough questions for libertarians.
It would be almost like you're constantly playing chess against the world's smartest computer that knows your every move, and you can never possibly catch up if you don't have that same computer.
Yes, and what if that person controls your rent? He controls where you get your food from. I mean, it controls your life. These are your children's school. This is when it becomes very, I think, dangerous. And at some point, we must step in and say, well, at least we must try to make the playing field as equal as possible. And it's not because I want to do that. I would rather just leave it a completely open market. But if we do that, and all of a sudden one side of the species, humanity takes off and leaves everyone else behind to be some subspecies, that's not fair. People ask me all the time about artificial intelligence, and they say, should we support it? And I say, yes, we should support artificial intelligence to the point when it becomes about 95% our capacity, and then we should stop. Because I see no reason on planet Earth to have a species that's twice as smart as me. I just don't think that's going to end well.
Well, we're smarter than almost every other creature on the planet, and look who dominates them. So
yeah, and look at what we've done to the planet environmentally, and look how we just hunt species down. We make them go extinct. We have to be careful. Even as libertarians, we have to be careful, because at some point the free market really can be dangerous in the techno kind of futurist world we're discussing, where change happens so rapidly. I think that's one of the biggest differences about transhumanism today versus, let's say, 10 years ago, is the change of scientific progress is amazingly quick. Like 3 years ago, we were talking about driverless cars, how cool it'd be. Now we see the Teslas on the road, and that's just what we see today. Now, probably 3 or 4 years, we're going to have robots opening our front doors. I have a robot in my house. It can do 1,000 different things. I mean, the world is changing.
Physical robot with like arms and legs, or?
Yes. It's about 4.5 feet tall. I took it on my bus trip during my presidential campaign, and at the time, it was like the most sophisticated robot that you could buy for around $500. And frankly, it does it has basic AI in it. It can do basic answers. Okay, it's already 2 years later. It's already obsolete.
Do you have a name for this robot?
Yes, his name is Jethro, named after the protagonist of my novel, The Transhumanist Wager.
It's so funny because in some ways it sounds so crazy for someone to have a robot butler or whatever. I don't know if you call it a butler, but that's how I envision it. I remember watching the movie Rocky IV when I was maybe 8 years old, and they had a robot butler. So and obviously they probably had way better technology even back then. So you can only imagine what kind of technology exists that we can't even access yet. It's really mind blowing.
Oh, no. I mean, this thing can do things like basically teach your kids and play with your kids and stuff like that. But, it's what's happening is what's crazy is how fast in 2 years the market has changed and it becomes more sophisticated. And now science grows exponentially. So whatever happened in 2 years is now going to happen 1 year. And then after that's going to happen in half a year, and so on and so on. And I think a lot of people don't realize how fast the world is changing. Genetic editing is perhaps the most important science now of the 21st century. We didn't even know about it 2 years ago, basically. And now all of a sudden we're talking about eradicating malaria from the face of the earth using genetic editing. And in some ways that's wonderful. But at the same time, it's, wow, we've had 750,000 deaths from malaria every year. And all of a sudden we have the possibility to stop that. But it's a very serious power in our hands, because we can also augment our intelligence, and the Chinese are working on it. The Americans aren't, though, because we have a moratorium on that type of research, unfortunately. But you can see how crazy and how fast some of this technology is. This is one of the reasons why I'm running for governor, is because I'm trying to be the very first person to create a lot of the libertarian policy on it, so that hopefully we don't get stuck with a bunch of moratoriums, or we don't get stuck in a religious culture that's afraid of this stuff. We can move forward with it, but probably cautiously. I'm going to say cautiously myself, but I'm still a techno optimist. I still want to push forward with it all.
Now, Zoltan, I want to dig a little bit further into just how this concept of transhumanism intersects with the ideas of liberty. We're going to do that in just a minute after a quick word from today's sponsors.
Hey guys, this is Roger Paxton, and if you're fed up with the government running every single aspect of your life, but you're not listening to the Lava Flow podcast yet, then what's wrong with you? Check us out at thelavaflow.com, or just go back to sucking up to the government. The Lava Flow podcast, striking the root every single episode.
This is Chris Spangle, and I am the host of We Are Libertarians, which you can find in iTunes, Google Play, or at wearelibertarians.com. We are a podcast that brings you all of the irreverence that modern politics deserves by examining current events from a libertarian perspective. So please, check us out at wearelibertarians.com.
Hey everyone, the Johnny Rocket Launchpad is Liberty. Each week we strive to bring you the best guests in talk radio. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad delivers weekly interviews of noteworthy politicians, experts, and activists. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad is bringing the party to the Libertarian Party and launching ideas in your direction. Check us out at johnnyrocketlaunchpad.com, and you can hear me, Kurt Nelson, and the beautiful Heather Nixon talk about the ideas of liberty, rock and roll.
Sure, and let's get into more about how this all intersects with politics. Like, as I mentioned earlier, you started an entire political party, really just to promote this movement. I'm sure you probably didn't think you were going to win the presidency in 2016 as a member of the Transhumanist Party, but you certainly generated a lot of conversation. I heard your names during the 2016 campaign several times, and you got the word out there. I mean, honestly, I've heard the word, but I only heard about the concept really of transhumanism to a deeper extent in the last few months through yourself and also Ford Fisher, who I know you are working with on the Transhuman documentary coming up soon. He's a past guest on this program, and I've really dug into it since then, and I can tell you're as excited today as I am just learning more about it now. But it sounds like you've had this excitement for, the whole time you've been involved in this movement, ever since you almost got, killed by that landmine and started digging into it. So, I mean, it's definitely kind of contagious, your excitement about this.
Well, cool. Let me just tell you a personal story for one of the reasons why I'm excited about it. Unfortunately, my father is around 72, 73 years old. He just had his fourth heart attack, and he's certainly not going to live much longer, not more than a few months or max a year or two, whatever. But, after his fourth heart attack, he's been kept alive through a lot of radical technology. He had his first heart attack when he was 51, about 22, 23 years ago. All this stuff of replacing, putting valves inside to replace veins and arteries and bypasses and stuff like this, 15, 20 years ago, and now even today, what they're doing, this is all very transhumanist technology. And of course, they're also working on an artificial heart. In case you don't know, a third of everybody will die from heart disease or a heart attack or something related to the heart. And it's a pump. Why don't we create an artificial pump and stick it in everybody, and then we can save those third of the people? But when you have a family member that's very close to perishing, and, you love him, you don't want that to happen, you look for ways to overcome that. Especially in my case, is I don't believe in an afterlife. It's not that I'm a hardcore atheist, but I'm just someone who's, I don't believe in something afterwards. And
maybe there is, but you haven't seen anything, in the world that we live in that can tell you that it's there.
Of course. And so, my father's sort of in that same boat. He feels the same way. But it's been great that we've been able to give him these extra decades. And I wish we could give him more extra decades. In fact, if we just spent more money and believed that we could do this and had more people try to, innovate in terms of technology and science, we will at some point make it so that people don't have to probably die at all. And, okay, that's very controversial for some people, but that's really the core of why I'm excited about transhumanism. I got two children. I got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. I mean, the worst thing in the world you can ever imagine is a child having cancer and having to die. Well, the people that are out there fighting those things are the real heroes of society. I mean, they're saving lives. Like I said, the person who invented genetic editing can now save 750,000 lives. I mean, give that person a Nobel Prize. I mean, this is incredible stuff from a humanitarian perspective.
So what are some of the biggest issues? As you said, that you're running as a governor for California, as a libertarian, and you're doing so again to maybe lead the way in crafting a lot of policies related to transhumanism. So what are some of the biggest political issues that you think this technology will bring up, and how would you go about addressing some of them?
Well, so the one that I keep getting myself in trouble for, of course, in both the Libertarian Party and just with friends, libertarian friends, is that
I already know where you're going with this. So I'm going to let you try to hang yourself instead of making me do
it. Good. Is essentially, look, automation, robots, software, they're taking jobs. When Trump says, "Oh, we're going to bring back jobs," or immigrants are taking jobs, that's not the truth. That's not the truth at all. The truth are jobs are being lost to automation and to technology, and that's not going to go away. In fact, that's going to increase. We have millions and millions of jobs that will be lost probably in the next 24 months because of automation, and after that, tens of millions of jobs. So what do you do with all these people who have lost their jobs and probably cannot be retrained in time with a new job, because then some robot will take that job? And so, one of the major platforms of both my 2006 presidency as well as the gubernatorial race I'm in now in California is to support a basic income of some sort. Now, for libertarians, that's a very controversial idea because some libertarians in the past have supported, some notable ones. But at the same time, there have been various different versions. And of course, I would have a version that would not raise taxes, would take money from the military, would take money from mostly, I think, from some of the federal natural resources that the government is holding, $125 trillion worth, and try to give that money, monetize our country, and give that directly to people who have lost their jobs so that they do not revolt. They do not cause civil strife. Because I can tell you, in 2 or 3 years, when 4 million truck drivers, and these are grown men, driving trucks, and many of them bear guns, they're tough guys. When you take away their jobs and don't give them anything in return, they're not just going to sit down. We need a policy in place, not just in California, but in America, that will make it so that people, when they lose their jobs to robots, have something else to look forward to. And it probably won't be working anymore.
So, what do you think that humans are going to do once technology sort of runs everything almost automatically? I know there's a lot of kind of free market people, free market economists who have broken this stuff down. And a lot of them will argue that, over time, the greater technology, even if you're losing jobs right now, you're freeing up so much human productivity that it's not a bad thing that you don't need to expend human labor to make a car or what have you. And I do, tend to agree with that in the long term, but I do see that there is this short-term problem that at the very minimum that's going to occur. You're not going to have a 55-year-old guy who's been trucking all his life, making 6 figures, suddenly lose that job, and he's not going to suddenly acquire necessarily the new skills that he needs to live out the last 10 years of his career. So there is some need. I don't know if your solution is the one, but it certainly is a problem that will need to be addressed somehow.
Yeah, no, and there's no question. And I'm not trying to say that I have the best solution. No, and also I want to tell everyone out there that there are so many different forms of basic income. I mean, Richard Nixon almost passed one during his presidency. There are many different forms. There are negative taxes and stuff like that, various libertarian versions out there. Some are just purely socialist that sound crazy, that would bankrupt the country. But there are ones out there that I think can balance what's happening. But one thing I often point out is that people think that, it's worked out so far that in our economy, all the technology has always created new wealth and new jobs. But what's happening is inequality is growing. And we kind of go back to that same dilemma we had earlier in the podcast, which was, what if the 1% end up with everything, including all that technology, to make themselves something more special than us? At some point, libertarians will have to say, well, the great majority of us are not that 1%. So what do we do? It's the same idea of why we despise tyrants. We don't want someone having power over us, nor do we want the 1% to have power of us. Equality is kind of the backbone of a lot of the libertarian ideology out there. So we need to sort of insist on it. Now, again, a lot of the ideas that I put out with the basic income would tap into the federal natural resources out there, which are, worth huge amounts of money, about 5 or 6 times the national debt. We could wipe out the debt with it. We could monetize the land and give it to the people. It belongs to the people after all. And that could pay for a basic income for literally decades and generations to come. So that's one way I would do it. The problem is it may not be actually enough for a living standard. So we still are going to have to come up with other ways. But at least it gives us a ground floor so people don't starve to death and their children have something over their heads. Because I can assure you, I began my career at National Geographic as essentially a war zone correspondent or a conflict zone correspondent. When, kids don't have roofs over their heads, parents freak out and do crazy things. And that's how wars start. And that's how terrible things happen. So whatever happens, if we want America to continue, we're going to need to protect our people so that they don't feel this need to stand up and fight. Because if they do, all those truck drivers are going to pull out their handguns and show the government and show, society what they're made of. And that's where we don't want to be, because we don't need a civil war. What we need is a smooth transition where everybody gets somehow a better life through all this technology. And I think we can get there. We're just going to need some very sensible policies.
One more thing I want to ask you about, directly tied into the politics of this, is that you've on multiple occasions have advocated, or at least suggested, the possibility of a robot running for president someday. Now, is that just something you kind of controversially put out there to draw attention to, or do you actually think we could see this, and do you think that's actually a reasonable thing that we might want to even accept?
Well, so, let's be honest. I do put out there things to sometimes provoke, because when you're running a presidential campaign as an independent person, essentially a third party, you are trying to get attention. But let's be honest. They have a new competition. I think it's a $5 million purse for the best robot that can give a TED Talk by 2020. Now, that's 3 years away. Now, if you've heard TED Talks, they're incredibly complicated. So you could have ask a robot a question, and it would then say, okay, and then give you a 20-minute TED Talk. And that's in 2020. And mind you, that's 36 months. So the point is, it's very, very likely by 2028, we will have machines that are at least as smart as human beings, if we allow that to happen. There might be some regulations put in or whatnot. One thing we might be able to do is program a machine that is as smart as us to be truly altruistic in the sense that no president has ever been like that. It would only do, from a statistical point of view, what is in the best interest of the people, given the maximum amount of people. Let's say we, put libertarian philosophies in it, and they've just said, this is what we're going to do. Well, that's essentially what they're doing in many hedge funds these days, where AI is taking over the trading and working off algorithms that are just designed to make as much money as possible. Well, we could do something saying we want to make as much prosperity, given all these parameters, for Americans. It's very possible by 2028 we'll have that. The real question is, will we allow that? Will we want that as a human species? And this is this comes into this kind of crazy world we're about to enter in 10 years' time, where how far do we actually merge with machines? Because if we start to do that, then they might end up being people that lead. But don't look at an AI as only a president. Maybe the idea of being a president as a leader right now, maybe we should look at it in terms of it's just something that makes our lives, the transitions, the commerce, the different kind of interactions, that much more smooth. Maybe we don't even need a president. And that's where AI could step in. And that's kind of one of the ideas I liked about it. It wasn't this AI dictator or AI president. It was just a machine that made it so we didn't even need a government.
And going back to the sci-fi scenarios, I was a fan of the Twilight Zone, Black Mirror, which is really even more relevant since it really addresses the technology side of things nowadays. But when I hear this talk of the robot being programmed to do what's best for humanity, the scenario that jumps to my mind is, well, I've done the math, and it turns out what's best for humanity is to kill 90% of them or kill them all. Are these scenarios that you think are, the more I talk to you, the less science fiction and the more possible science they sound. But do you see these things as being something that man can sort of just control through how it builds this technology, but by building in mechanisms or fail safes that can maybe say, all right, but if you actually try to, cause genocide here, we have something that'll just shut this whole thing down?
Well, I think that's the $1 million question. And that's why that's why AI is such a topic in the news these days, is because you have a bunch of people saying, no, we can control the machines. And you have a bunch of other people saying, I've seen the Terminator too many times. You're not going to be able to control it. And honestly, as a techno-optimist, I believe we can control the machines. But, there's also different other ideas coming through this pipeline. I recently wrote a short fiction story called The Jesus Singularity, because we have essentially 535 members of Congress, the president, 8 Supreme Court justices. Everybody believes in religion. There's a very strong chance that any type of AI that comes into being, and the military is certainly leading the way. I've been consulting with the U.S. Navy. They would be interested in probably giving it some of its Judeo-Christian values. Now, when you say that, what do you mean, like teaching it the Bible or teaching it this? And this is when you get into this incredible idea of like, wow, are we recreating another human being in this machine? And is it going to be full of all the same, issues that we have, psychological issues? Can you program a machine to hate and love and these kinds of things? Well, maybe that shouldn't be in charge of us, especially if it's so much smarter than us. And I think that's where everyone's going to have to sit down and decide how far we want to take these machines. I've even written an article in New Scientist about robots voting, because, we have already billions and billions of robots on planet Earth. But in 10 years, with various upgrades, those robots are probably going to be pretty sophisticated, at least as sophisticated as a 18-year-old person, which would have voting rights in America. Do you give the billions of robots in America voting rights? What states do they vote in? Does that change the presidential election? Does gerrymandering come into effect? The world we're entering in is so complex that I think the next 10 years will be certainly the most interesting time in history. And as a society, we're going to have to look forward and try to deal with all this, because it is scary stuff.
Well, you think gerrymandering's bad now. Wait till the robots are just, running their algorithms and calculating the perfect district so that they never lose their robot election.
And of course, and what do you do with your Echo, or what do you do with your iPhone when the server's in Nebraska, but you're sitting in California? And where does that belong? The whole thing, it dissolves in what we've been used to the last, few hundred years. It gets so amazingly complex. And I think what happens is then you get somebody like Trump in office, and he's talking about very basic things like, building a wall to keep immigrants out, or, we need to bring back jobs to the manufacturing. This is not the what's happening with the world. what's happening with the world is 20 miles from me in Silicon Valley, and they're working on neural prosthetics where you can literally use telepathy to control your iPhone, or you can fly drones with your mind, or you can trade stocks with your mind, or you have robotic eyes that are connected to these things. This is really the future, and this is not some faraway future. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent on this type of stuff already. You can go out to a store and buy some of these mind-reading headsets. I mean, so I think what I'm trying to say is the world is going to be incredibly complex moving forward through the next decade. But we, as libertarians and as just everybody in general, has to stand up and face these issues and ask these questions. Most importantly, I think we have to ask these questions because they are going to be challenging.
Well, I think what you hit on there is key. I mean, we might not all have all the answers. You don't claim to have all the answers, but this technology is here. It's not even just on the way. It's here, and it's going to continue to be here in many different forms. So we can either ignore it, or we can at least start talking about how these things are going to be addressed politically or what have you. So I'm so glad that you are out there, Zoltan, on the forefront and trying to bring attention to this issue and how we're going to sort of tackle this stuff as a society. So before I let you go, why don't you give everybody out there some more information about how they can find your work and everything else you've got going on, whether it's your articles and that sort of thing, and as well as, of course, your run for the California governorship, how they can find out more about that.
Sure. Well, just so your listeners know, I began my futures career by writing a novel called The Transhumanist Wager, which has now officially been compared over 1,000 times in writing to Atlas Shrugged. So it's very much an Ayn Rand-esque, but a futurist thing like that. So check out that book on Amazon, The Transhumanist Wager. And to find out more information about me, just go to zoltanistvan.com. I have a huge amount of my videos, a lot of my articles. I'm a columnist at Vice, Huffington Post, places like that. So I'm always putting out new articles, and find me on social media and say hello.
All right, well, Zoltan, obviously you're going to be in the political eye, especially for me out here in California, so we'll definitely keep an eye on your campaign and everything you're doing with the transhuman movement, and we'll definitely keep in touch. So keep up all the great work.
Hey, thanks so much, and thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
You got it, man. Thanks a lot. Take care. Keep on roaring. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Zoltan Istvan, a guy I've been hearing about for quite some time. Remember hearing about his Transhumanist Party way back during the 2016 presidential election and the whole year run up to that. I was spending so much time interviewing Libertarian candidates like Austin Peterson, Marc Allen Feldman, guys like that he kind of slipped under my radar at the time, but since then I've dug a little bit more into transhumanism, and I gotta say I'm really fascinated by the subject. I was pushed along a little bit by Howie Snowden, a guy you guys all know from contributing to this podcast and many other roundtables, and also through a past guest, Ford Fisher, who I just found out basically as I came to interview him on totally different subjects that he was actually producing a documentary on transhumanism. That's the Transhuman documentary. I will link to my interview with him. Of course, Zoltan is a part of that documentary as well. It certainly gives us a lot to ponder, and I know not everybody out there is going to see Zoltan's political worldview as entirely libertarian in nature, but in many ways, a lot of these concepts of transhumanism, I believe, are going to line up with greater freedom for people. Of course, there's always that risk of freedom, what seems like freedom, quickly turning into totalitarianism. So, as with all technology, we just got to be on the lookout for how it's used, how it can hinder individual rights, and how it can maybe even make people have a little more liberty in life. And while you guys ponder that, we're going to take a minute to dig back into the Liberty mailbag and answer a few letters of liberty.
This is another Letters of Liberty song. That last one I wrote was a downer. It somehow just felt wrong. The Lions said they didn't like it. I'm not sure if that's true, so I'm gonna keep on writing till I find the one they do. So please help me validate my poor life choices.
All right, and thanks once again to my man Dan Smots, who wrote that little jingle for us. Dan is, of course, also the designer of our t-shirts, which you can find over at lionsofliberty.store. And if you guys do, in fact, decide to join the Lions of Liberty Pride, you'll get a automatic 20% discount on everything over at that store, including our Lions of Liberty beer koozies, so you can drink along with us, keep your drink cold while listening to the show. And Dan is actually just became a member of the Lions of Liberty Pride himself. So, Dan, glad to have you aboard. A super fan. Our first letter of liberty today comes from Nathan Vowell, and Nathan asks, is Austin Peterson right and or justified in dismissing the NAP, the non-aggression principle? Now, Austin Peterson has been a guest on this program a couple times, and I asked him about that the first time he was on this show. And honestly, I do believe that his position on the NAP is a lot more nuanced, really honestly, than even he put out there in the beginning. I think he originally really attacked it, A, because he does not think it's a good way to explain the ideas of liberty, and B, to get attention, to be trolly, to get people talking about him, to get people angry at him, because that gets the attention on the internet. And I think that was his strategy when he first started kind of coming out against the NAP, well before his presidential run. But really, in talking to him about it, I don't think he's actually against the concept of the non-aggression principle. He said as much on this program, and I'll link to that episode in today's show notes at lionsofliberty.com/287. What he really is against the NAP as the be-all, end-all explanation for selling the ideas of liberty. He thinks that there are a lot more nuanced situations. Now, I agree with him in a sense. Now, I agree you can't just shout NAP, non-aggression principle, and expect people to totally understand your philosophy. I don't think that means you need to reject it or really, to say it's wrong or say we shouldn't talk about it. I mean, it's a good way to live life. It's a libertarian way to live life, to live by the principle that you don't aggress against other people, that you don't initiate violence against other people unless some sort of violence has been initiated against you. I think that's the proper way to look at things. But at the same time, I do think you need to look at things in a more nuanced way, and you can't always do that just by saying that, non-aggression principle, just by using that phrase. I think we can actually still use the non-aggression principle and just simply discuss the nuance of particular situations. Like, for example, noise pollution. If I'm driving by someone's house and I honk my horn at somebody, no one's going to say I violated the NAP probably and I'm, causing too much pollution and aggressing against them. But if I take that same car and park outside somebody's house and pound on my horn and I don't let go for hours and hours and hours, at some point I'm going to consider that a form of noise pollution, and I would consider that an act of aggression. Now, that also doesn't mean that I can go shoot that person in the head because they honked their horn really loudly at my house. But if we're only talking NAP, well, he violated the NAP, and now I can go violate his NAP and kill him. Obviously, most libertarians don't actually think that simplistically, and I'm not trying to imply that they do, but I do think that there is a lot of nuance that isn't explained simply by using that term. It's not as simple as don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, even though I do sort of agree with that initial way to tell people the basis of the philosophy. But when you really apply it to real-world situations, you do need to explain things further and realize that not every situation is so black and white. There is nuance involved, and we need to break it down. We can still use the principle in order to help us break it down. And, that might be where Austin and I disagree quite a bit. But at the same time, I don't think he's necessarily wrong in criticizing the strategy that many use by just kind of putting it out there and not being willing to dive into the nuance. And this doesn't describe most libertarians, but I've seen libertarians like this, that reject all nuance. It's NAP and that's it. And if you try to have a further conversation, you are a statist. And I think that's just silly because guess what? Most people are going to require a further conversation and ask further questions and not really understand just saying non-aggression versus aggression. That's the end of the story. I've got another question from Zach Vall, a regular contributor to the Letters of Liberty, and Zach asks, do you think we will ever see the repeal of Obamacare? Now, ever is the key word here because that's a tough one. I mean, in 300 years, who knows what our government is going to look like? There probably won't be something called Obamacare 300, 400 years from now. I think we can almost definitely say that. But if you mean ever in the sense of, will this Republican Congress repeal Obamacare? No, I really don't think so for a lot of reasons. One, when you condition the public and put them on what is essentially a public welfare program in a sense, even though that's not the way it's set up and the government's not the direct payer. That's essentially what this scheme is. We're subsidizing people that didn't have insurance before, and many of them couldn't afford it, and now they have it at a subsidized rate. It's going to be very politically difficult to kick those people off, and I don't necessarily even advocate doing that overnight, but the fact is there is just simply no political willpower at all in the Republican Party other than from a few people such as Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Some people might say Ted Cruz. Can't say I trust the guy, to be honest. But there's a very small movement, the Freedom Caucus, that really does want to actually repeal it and then institute a plan which is all about free market reforms and helping people via tax credits and that kind of thing, which isn't perfect, but it's moving in the right direction. But even if we get some kind of free market reforms and whatever new health care bill crops up, you're not going to see the repeal of Obamacare. You're going to see tweaks to Obamacare. Honestly, even if the best case scenario that incorporates a lot of Rand Paul's ideas passes, I still don't think you're going to see a repeal of a lot of the provisions of Obamacare. The best that we can maybe hope for is re-legalizing catastrophic insurance and some kind of changing of the mandate, but I do not think that we're going to see a scenario where people that are subsidized now lose their insurance. I don't think that's going to happen. Again, because it's very politically difficult, and that kind of is the cornerstone of Obamacare. So as far as a repeal, no, not happening. Not in our lifetimes, at least not in the next 4 years. And finally, I've got another question from Letters of Liberty MVP. This guy bombarded us with questions, and that's awesome because I can always use more. Andrew Swain asks, what disturbs you most about the Vault 7 revelations? It's actually pretty easy, because what disturbs me most is not the revelations themselves. I think that everything released in at least this first part, we've only seen year zero. We've only seen the 1% of this Vault 7 CIA stuff so far. So there's a lot more to come. But what we've seen so far, a lot of it is all stuff that I think a lot of libertarians, maybe some kooky conspiracy folks, might have already believed was happening. This just confirmed that the technology exists and that the CIA was more than willing to use it. The technology to spy on us through our smart devices, through our Amazon Alexa, which you can also listen to the Lions of Liberty podcast on, I'd like to point out, through smart cars, through smart TVs. A lot of people that are in tune with this stuff, are not exactly surprised and blown away by it. But it should be really disturbing. It should especially be disturbing to people that aren't like us, that aren't, the nerds that are buried in this stuff already. But that's the most disturbing thing about it, is that no one's disturbed, other than people that are already horrified, already talking about this stuff for years and years and years. Those people are disturbed, but there's not really new people that I've seen that are disturbed. Either people are still ignorant about it because it's not talked about on CNN, and a lot of people still get their information from CNN. I'm sorry if I sound like Donald Trump, but it's fake news, my friends. It is fake news propaganda, the majority of the reporting from CNN and these mainstream outlets. That's why we're seeing such a resurgence, or a original surgence, I guess you might say, of alternative media, of what many people call fake news. But, at the end of the day, no, I just think that the fact that people aren't, there should be riots in the streets. You saw some riots and some protests after Trump was elected. This is what should be getting people out of their seats. This is what should be getting people to the streets. This is what should have people down in Langley protesting, knocking down the doors, saying, how dare you? How dare you do this to us? Not only do this to us, but do it with our tax money that you steal out of our damn paychecks, and probably even other money, because the CIA is funded by so much black money, and they're probably getting money. Well, not probably. We know for a fact they're getting money through illegal activities, through the drug trade. This has been going on for decades. It's all been very public. I don't need to go into all the conspiracies right now, but that's a great segue, because we did go into a whole lot of conspiracies on our special Conspiracy Corner bonus program, which was just released this past weekend. Of course, if you didn't hear it, that might be because you're not yet a member of the Lions of Liberty Pride. Anybody who joins up for only $5 a month, and by the way, we give you guys 12 to 15 free podcasts a month. You're going to get those even if you don't sign up. But if you do toss us $5 or more a month, you're going to get access to our bonus audio, which so far includes a blooper reel. We're also going to have an extra Felony Friday bonus roundtable coming up, and just released this past weekend, the Conspiracy Corner, where we get into all sorts of conspiracies. The theoretical topic was George Bush and his foreknowledge of 9/11, if there was any, and we kind of went all over the place. We talked about just about everything. We touched on O.J. Simpson, on the Oklahoma City bombing. We touched on all sorts of stuff. You're going to have to become a member of the Lions of Liberty Pride to hear it. So head on over to lionsofliberty.com/support and check it out, guys. It's been a blast. Don't forget, This is only a third of what you get every single week here at the Lions of Liberty podcast. You also get Brian McWilliams this coming Wednesday with Electric Liberty Land. He'll look at all sorts of comedy, culture, and liberty-related stuff for you. And then moving on to Felony Friday, where John Odermatt looks at the broken criminal justice system. We try to have a little bit of something for everybody, including now those conspiracy folks out there. So if you want it, head on over to lionsofliberty.com/support and join up, or just hit that subscribe button on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. If you want a way that you can help us out without actually sending us any money, that's fine too. Just tell a friend about the show. Help us organically. It doesn't need to cost you a dime to help us grow. We really do appreciate every single one of you out there listening. Until next time, folks, live long and live free.